welcome to Nick Loading In, my commentary channel. Today's video is going to be going over Paige's second video that dropped yesterday. Sheds a little bit more insight, I think, to, the manipulation and the cult factor and the ability to wield these teachings in two separate ways, and the obvious decision that was made for Jody and Ruby to do that, right? I definitely want to touch on a couple pieces that I think were really important. Before we jump into it, though, as always, everything in this video is my opinion and my perspective. I encourage everybody to go do their own research, formulate your own opinions, and as always, please do so respectfully. Okay. So first I want to make a comment on the fact that, like, since Paige's first video dropped, and a lot of, like, the larger content creators and stuff that have been following the case as well kind of came out with their own coverage of Paige's first video, I was extremely kind of alarmed, I guess. I don't know why, because I think it's to be expected. It seems to be the stance for most people out there. But I was just really, it was crazy kind of some of the harshness that I saw in regards to Paige, like saying, like, she didn't really say much in her first video, nothing substantial, blah, blah, blah. She said a lot. And I feel like because people are so zoned in on their opinion of the situation that has transpired in because of Jody and Ruby, that everybody that's involved in this whole thing is damned. They're condemned. And it's concerning for me because I just already feel like there's so much lack of compassion and understanding, and instead of us trying to understand what Paige is trying to tell us as well, like, to help people be more aware, this idea that, somehow intellect or education or these factors come into play as far as being aware of what you're getting involved with when it seems cult-like, okay? And so it's really easy to sit on the outside and judge the situation, especially when we have all the information at hand at this point. So I understand that it seems very clear to us where we sit now in our vantage point that Jody's a nut, she's a narcissist, and a freaking psychopath. Very easy to see that. But what I want, and I hope people can take away from what I want to discuss in this video, is that cults today have evolved just as society has, because they will always prey on people's wants and desires right alongside of their vulnerabilities. We cannot be so naive to think that we're above falling victim to this type of thing. I think we've all been through some type of betrayal. I think that we've all kind of experienced someone in our life that wasn't exactly who they made themselves out to be, and we fell into some traps with them, be it a partner or a friend. So I don't think that anybody is above this. It's not about intellect. It's not about education. Paige is one of the ones that eventually saw through the bullshit. She had a moral compass enough to see through that. And even if it took a little while, and I think that's where we need to remain very open-minded to the fact that Jody was obviously good at her manipulation. She had a lot of time to practice it. It's very clear that this woman has her issues and is very narcissistic, and thank God she was caught, right? She was caught, but not without inflicting a very long list of trauma and damage to many people's lives. I've also been one that's been pretty critical on the teachings because I have only looked at it in the light that it was presented within Ruby and Jody's sick, twisted kind of interpretation of things, or whatever Jody's true intentions. But Paige, in my opinion, really does set a great stage again for showing that people can interpret these types of teachings and then wield it as a weapon or wield it for good. I just appreciate her for kind of sharing how she was applying them and viewing them, and how that does separate her from being, I feel like, lumped into these people just because of her affiliation with Connections at some point, right? Anyways, let's go ahead and just get into this before I get too far ahead of myself. But I want to go over some of the bits that I found important and kind of why I found them important as well.
I will say that nothing that I share will be sensational. I plan on giving a very methodical timeline of events and my understanding as it escalated into my leaving Connections and then recognizing where it went afterwards. It won't do anyone any favors for me to just jump right into that without explaining how somebody as masterful as Jody Hildebrandt can walk you down a path to where you completely stop trusting your own judgment or the judgment of family members who love you, and basically give her all of your will.
Obviously, this was like a slow burn for Paige as well, right? Like it was over the course of 3 to 4 years. And as we get into this, we're going to, and I feel like, at least I feel like I was getting a clearer picture of Jody's process and the fact that she was methodical just as much as she was maybe fortunate in a lot of situations. But this was something that she, I feel like, was honing and cultivating and sculpting from the moment she stepped foot into this field and began her career. And I think she was seasoned in her process by the time Ruby especially came into the picture. And I also think that Ruby was just a perfect candidate. Now, Paige will continue to go on from here to kind of describe how their relationship, her and her husband's relationship with the Frankies, kind of grew close on that trip overseas. She also kind of explains what her strong interest was in that time, at that time, in the whole correlating the peace versus pain aspects of Jody's teachings and Connections, and it's again correlating it to genetics and those things that they were kind of working on with this different organization at the time. Which she does say some pretty interesting things about what Kevin said on that trip.
I do recall Kevin saying, "This is a cult." And if you had looked at Jody's Google reviews, there were a lot of people on there that also said this was a cult. When Ruby came on into Connections and Kevin was like, "No, this is a cult," we just kind of laughed about it because it was like, oh, he just doesn't want to look, or he just doesn't want to heal what? I have no idea. But those were the judgments that were passed by Jody, demonstrated by Jody, and easy to pick up.
Okay, so listen, I know that there's a lot of haters on Kevin out there, and I understand why, definitely. But for me, this kind of substantiates even further that Kevin was telling a lot of the truth in his police interviews, because he does touch on the fact that, you know, at first he was like, he literally, I think, describes it as kind of like a cult full of women who were like man haters, basically. And then it also further kind of substantiates what I'm saying about these modern cults. And like, if you really think that there's no way in hell you could be a victim of, or fall victim to a cult, or, you know, get involved with one, I think it happens for a lot of people kind of by accident or by this situation, right? Kevin was like, he didn't listen to his gut. His wife was starting to get bought in. So now he's got, and then on top of that, he's got his friends, right? Who, mind you, the Hannas end up finding out later that they were also misled and deceived. But at that time, they were bought in. So you have some of the people closest to you really bought into this, and he explains that, like, in his interview as well. So I'm not saying that he was right in what he ultimately ended up doing by being absent, but I'm saying, again, it comes back to this manipulation, and it comes back to, there's a lot of fault to be placed on Jody, because she wasn't just like some random cult leader either, guys. Like, she's a licensed therapist. Okay? Like, I think that's another really important thing that we cannot forget. She's a licensed therapist.
A lot of your emails and a lot of your questions said, how could you follow somebody who wasn't married and who had no relationship with their children? Jody, first of all, didn't share her private information, so and not many of us asked at the beginning. You know, in a parenting class, now would I ask? Absolutely. But at the time, she spoke in terms of parenting as if her children were still a part of her life. She spoke, it was a parenting class, so she rarely spoke on marriage, but it was known that she was divorced, but it was alluded to that, basically that it wasn't her fault. Obviously that changed over time as I started paying closer attention and watching things. I didn't recognize that Jody was the exception to her teachings for a few years. Jody was also masterful at giving a 10% truth that she could tell and letting you fill in the gaps. So you were telling yourself the story that you wanted to hear. So she would speak to a daughter who, and as she's crying, telling you she didn't want her as a mother and just wanted a Disneyland dad, and you're like, oh, it's because she was holding her accountable, or because the whole honest, responsible, humble thing. Is that the situation? Absolutely not. But that's what she was masterful at. So
again, just like I was saying, we have all the information from this vantage point, right? Like, we know everything because we're sitting on the other side of it, and all the information is being laid out on the table. It's ready and available. But at the time that these individuals were experiencing this, that Paige and Johnny were involved in everything, Jody was sharing what she needed to share. So for me, when I look at this, she was just sharing the information that got her that sympathy and that empathy that she needed, that ability to kind of like build that bond with these people. She presented it as if she was kind of sharing her own vulnerabilities in a way with these people, right? So naturally, I think when you are sharing these tidbits about yourself, you're kind of putting it in a vulnerable situation. She also does paint herself to be a victim, like a parenting situation, right? She's divorced, so she owns that. She does provide that information, but then to kind of, I feel like, explain away why there's not this strong relationship with her kids, why they aren't showing up to her connections shit. And like, I feel like she then, my daughter says she doesn't want me as a mom because she's got this Disneyland dad. And then like Paige says, oh, we fill in those missing pieces ourselves, and thinking that, oh, well, her kid probably, dad's so fun, does all this, just the fun guy, and then mom's more disciplined, or more, there's one parent that they at that time think is better because they're more fun or more lenient or what have you. And so for me, I feel like it just paints this picture clearly of Jody's infiltration into people's lives and into people's thought processes and decision making, and how she kind of manipulates them and maybe makes them second guess what they're questioning. Because if you're a good friend, you'll be there for somebody. If you're a good friend, you would care. And then you're presenting things based off of religious values and things like that as well. Like, she really does, I feel like, a good job of just preying on people's emotions and what she knows is like important to them, or in addition to their vulnerabilities, right? I don't know. I just feel like I can see it all unfolding, and maybe that's because I've had my own experiences with a few narcissists in my time. I can just see Jody's like intentions manifesting as we go along.
that's right. You have to go find a higher source of power than yourself that you can rely on as a gauge, as the spindle on your compass pointing north. Now, Jody had become north for me. And a big part of the reason she had become North was because she's a licensed therapist. I took that term as being a licensed therapist as she was qualified, that she knew more than me, and therefore I was less than her.
There's a certain amount of kind of power that position holds. Many people are just going to follow their therapist's direction or advice, and oftentimes they're going to do it without a lot of questions. And if I'm honest, what a perfect situation for basically a cult leader, right? Like, as I've said, they prey on people's desires and weaknesses and vulnerabilities. What a perfect environment for them to do their thing, to take advantage of people. The people go to therapists, and I've said it in so many of my previous videos, they literally share their deepest, darkest secrets, their truest feelings, and typically without any filters or without holding back at a certain point. And the therapist is meant to cultivate a safe space for that.
So in 2020, our friendship with the Frankies grew. I only met their children once and never heard, I didn't watch their YouTube channel, so I wasn't aware of any practices that, parenting practices that Ruby did that I thought were glaring. I was aware that she'd sent one of her children to Anasazi, and where that could have been alarming, I had a lot of friends. I knew a lot of people in my high school who had also utilized this program that was that's intention was to go and basically take kids out of the environment that's harming them and to reset them in a way of living off the land and getting closer to nature. And so I was aware of that with the Frankies, but nothing that I thought was like, oh, they're horrible people or they're really messed up. I mean, I thought they were really wonderful.
First, I found it interesting that she says that she met the kids once, and by the way that she words it, it seems like it was literally just that one time, which is just interesting if that's the case, because I mean, they both have kids, probably some of them close to the same age, at least. So just found that interesting that there wasn't more interaction with the children in any way. But maybe, I mean, I don't know, because she talks about being close with them. So I just found that interesting. She also mentions that she didn't really watch the channel, so like at the time that it was running, obviously she does touch on the fact that like she has realized that some of the things that were, you know, seeping through the channel around 2020 were directly in relation to the way that Ruby decided to weaponize them and use them as like an element of control, or through the lens of control, right? But the thing that I found kind of most intriguing, for me at least, was the way that she talked about Anasazi and where Chad was sent, and how she didn't really think anything bad of it, that she was aware of it. And the reason why that stands out for me so much is that I've been doing a lot of research into the troubled teen industry, and I've found a lot of ties that come back to Mormons being a big source of the kids that attend, and also the people that kind of own a lot of these particular organizations. Anyways, it just, for me, it was just very interesting that she then goes on to explain like her understanding and knowledge of Anasazi, even from her past, going back to high school, is what she says, which is crazy. And that it was so normalized that like this was like a program that kids went to or were part of, and like it expresses kind of, again, just her understanding of what the intentions of the program were, getting in touch with nature, kind of resetting, taking them out of the environment that they're in. But in reality, a lot of these places are super freaking harsh, and I don't think Anasazi is any different. If any of you were able to see when Chad came back from, I think he was out there 70 something days, maybe it was longer. It was definitely more than like 60 days or whatever, that I think they kind of, I feel like that was mentioned somewhere. It was longer. But there's a video of when he first comes back, and he is a twig, man. Like, I mean, he is a twig, and then he's like showing them what they ate out there. I mean, it's gnarly. Like, I understand like doing something like that, but it just feels like it's to this point of extreme. And if you know anything about the troubled teen industry, saw the program that really came out, the documentary on Ivy Ridge, I think it was called. Uh, these particular programs can often harbor a lot of abuse with children, and some of these outdoor ones especially have actually resulted in kids dying. So anyways, I just felt it was crazy that it was so normalized. And again, this is why, like, I've said it a little bit before, that some of the stuff that we on the outside might look at is normalized within the Mormon culture. And I'm not pointing the finger at the individuals. I think this is the whole big picture of the problem. It's that it is endorsed and often funded and supported and openly accepted in this culture, in this kind of community. Anyways,
Jody started confiding in me. We would have business calls, and then she would confide in me about having horrific nightmares. She said she wasn't sleeping, and when I asked the nature of these nightmares, they were out of a horror movie. I didn't understand them. I knew I wasn't qualified to help with them, but I just saw it as like she needed somebody to talk to. She needed someone to talk to express these to, and must have trusted me enough as a friend to explain it. One thing that was always common and present in these nightmares was that Satan himself was out to get her. And yes, I thought it was weird. It was one of those red flags where I was like, yeah, I see this as a red flag, but I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to make sense of it. Only that every so often, maybe once a month or once every 2 months, I'd ask how she's doing, and she'd say that she had another nightmare and that it was dark and twisted and terrifying and had to do with Satan and evil out to get her. And I was getting tired and agitated, and I think that was a part of why she started telling me her dreams. I think that's why she started expressing her personal life to me, to get a hook in to my heart, to control how I viewed her as this poor woman who's all alone in the world, who's just trying to lead people to truth. And how could I walk away from that? How could I leave that? I never once saw her ask for help. I only saw her state a problem and be upset and be like this, like victim-y and whiny, until somebody was like, well, this is what we could do. Well, this is how we could help.
Like Paige does describe, I do think that Jody was probably recognizing that Paige was like pulling away a bit, or maybe he was feeling some of that frustration and tension as this like cycle kept happening. For me, when I'll touch on this actually later when we get into what Paige ends up saying about how they were trying to grow the business, but I think there was a lot of factors going into Jody kind of stalling their methods in the end. And so I also think she sensed that resistance beginning to boil on Paige's end. So I do think that this was like an attempt to try to like pull that bond back together. I really don't know why. I don't know why, like, these night terrors of Satan coming after you, or whatever the full details of these nightmares were, being that Paige describes them as like horrific. It's just, I don't know if it's just playing off of the faith aspect that she's been preying on her entire career pretty much as well, but just very interesting decision to go that route. But at the same time, in a way, it seems to have worked, and where like Paige recognizes, like, obviously this isn't something that I can help you with. I'm not qualified, but like I'll be a good friend and I'll listen, like give you somebody to talk to. You know, per Paige's description of kind of the interactions inside of connections and that, and she describes like this main clique where she had these particular people very bought in, right, and how she starts kind of doing that same. It's crazy because it's like and Paige mentions it several times throughout her video about how this person is like the only exception to their very own teachings, and Jody was obviously displaying that constantly, right? Like, woe is me, I'm this victim, but then per true narcissistic mannerisms, I guess, or methods, like never outwardly really asking for that help, but like just having people give it, like offer it themselves. Just, it kind of plays into that grandiosity of like people serving them. And I think that's the whole program for Jody when she kind of marks these individuals that she decides to really build upon. At a certain point, it's weird because I don't know if this plays into some of Jody's own past trauma or something. I feel like there's something really dark and probably pretty fucked up there that she's ran from her whole life, considering in one of her talks she talks about, I think it was back in like 2019, maybe it's 2018, but it's one of the seminars or speeches that she gives where she's a keynote speaker or something. I'm pretty sure it's Eternal Core 2019. She talks about how she had issues with, I think it was anorexia, and she ended up going to one of those treatment centers for it, similar to probably what Paris went to, in a way, I would assume. Maybe not extreme like that. I don't know, but she talks about that past, and so obviously there's some deep-seated issues with self-image and self-confidence and like a lot of insecurity there to begin with, and I truly don't believe she ever healed. And then I think there's other issues going on as well, probably some maybe abandonment issues. And then this is me speculating and kind of going a little off script with it, but I recognize that she glues herself to certain people. She did it with the Hannas, and then it's like she wants these people constantly always around her, the attention fully on her. She needs like these people. I don't know if it's for validation. I know there's that narcissism in there, so like it's hard to gauge emotions or connections on a deep level. But it is bizarre because she does the same thing with the Hannas, or she's like getting close to them, then moves in with them, lives with them. And then fast forward to Ruby and the Frankies and Kevin, and she moves in with them, lives with them. And then after that, she successfully gets rid of Kevin in the household, and then the full control takes place. We can circle back to the orientation thing. Chad has openly said in one of his streams that he definitely thinks she was a lesbian. She may be. It's very weird tactics to separate the women from their husbands over and over again. And then just being in this position that she was in, a licensed therapist, very supported by the church, whether or not she was taken off that list or not, she was still, there's plenty of people who say that they got funding directly from their bishop to still see her. So anyways, let's move on.
Why is this something I keep giving time to over and over and over, and there's no change? And she's living as the exception to her teachings with this victim mindset, this everyone's out to get me, or Satan himself is out to get me, and I'm the only one that can do this. And so instead of going, wow, something's really wrong with her, I thought, I'm not kind enough. I am not serving. I am not being more generous with my time. Mind you, I had like 6 kids and 7 kids and 8 kids, and it was totally okay for me to not have time, right? But that's where, like, that's the mental aerobics that was happening. That's how messed up I had gotten, was that she had become more important than me. She'd become more important than my family. And while I thought I was doing this amazing job with my kids, the amount of time that she was taking, still get really upset because it was so selfish. I still feel really angry. Angry at myself for not seeing it. And angry at her for what she did, knowingly. I gave her a lot of time in 2020. And I was pregnant and had given birth to my 8th child in September of 2020.
You know what I mean about this demanding everything from the people she keeps close? I mean, it definitely ties into the cult elements as well, where every cult leader tends to completely kind of isolate their flock, if you will, like keep them real close. They demand everything from them, so there's no time for them to have for themselves, to think for themselves, to feel for themselves, to do for themselves. It's all about serving and providing. And
Johnny and I were trying so hard to come up with a plan for these coaches that were getting trained, to have the freedom to go out and teach in their own method and their own manner, making a commission, or let's see, charging how they wanted, but then only giving a small portion to Jody. You know, we had discussed the best business models over and over and over, and we were trying to do what's best for these women who were going to utilize these things as part of their livelihood. And
so we were kind of discussing this a little bit earlier when Paige was kind of talking about how Jody started coming to her and confiding in her about her nightmares after these business calls that they were having. And I said that we'd kind of come back to it and I'd expand on it a little bit more. Well, in this tidbit, Paige discusses kind of what her and Johnny were ultimately trying to do with the business plan and the format and the structure of how they were going to expand the business by utilizing the mental fitness trainers and all these coaches that they had in preparation, like we saw kind of midway through 2021, right? And she talks about how the goal was to basically get these coaches branched off into their own thing and taking these foundational principles and teachings and kind of expanding on them, if you will, in their own way, and you know, teaching them with their own kind of methods, or their just in their own fashion or style. And basically they would charge what they saw fit and kind of have control over their own business in a way, but they would just kick back a percentage to Jody. This is actually a very common structure that you will see within this industry, especially like the life coaching industry. Jody in this instance would kind of be at the top, where she would be able to earn this percentage, or in a way a loyalty on all these people. And if they're charging a good lump sum, she's going to get a decent kickback. I mean, she could probably literally just run her business off of these people, and that was kind of proclaimed to be the idea, is to kind of slowly phase Jody out, because her treatment and behavior and interactions with people had become very cold and calloused, right? She kind of talked about that, I think, in the first video that she released. The business idea was smart, and it was, you know, I think any real business person would probably be on board with that. But for me, when I hear that, I automatically think back to what Paige had said about the situation and how Jody kept talking about how Satan was after her, and that this was, you know, God had instructed her to teach these things to people, and that she was the only one that could do it.
When Ruby and I were putting this together, I had already seen how Ruby utilized these teachings and how harsh they were. I was taken aback many times by the lack of compassion that I had heard in how she shared the things that we were both learning. You know, it was the evidence that two people can hear the same thing and interpret it entirely different. And as we were doing this channel, I thought I would be able to help her see how these are beneficial through the lens of love, rather than the lens of control. If you take anything away from this video, I hope that it's recognizing that these teachings, any teachings, can be good until they're weaponized. You can recognize somebody's in moves from peace to pain. But when you look at their pain without compassion and start saying, well, what did you do to get there? Well, how are you being selfish? Well, how this, how that? You start manipulating them into a state of self-worthlessness. And what I started recognizing was that these teachings were being weaponized more often within how Jody taught them, more often than they were being like a ladder out of a pit. Instead of lowering down a ladder, somebody who's suffering in a hole, it was standing at the top and saying, well, you got yourself in there. How are you going to get yourself out? You have all the tools. What are you going to do? And it intellectualized this whole process and removed feeling from it. So she created an army of a bunch of people who could intellectualize problems with no feeling and then call out others on saying, well, you're not living honest, responsible, humble. You're in denial of your distortion and you don't want to look at it. And it was a very unloving, unkind, and unsafe place.
So I think Paige, now hearing this, was also hoping that she could maybe sway what was already existing and already in place back over to wielding these things in love as opposed to in control, and kind of restructuring the way that people interpreted these particular teachings. I don't know, just hearing Paige talk about just kind of how she had hoped to maybe help influence Ruby to restructure her interpretation, to see it more in a light or lens of love as opposed to a lens of control. Paige was one of the only ones that never really faltered from her moral compass from everything that we've now heard up to this point. She had a strong foundation within herself and an understanding of compassion and love. And that is ultimately what separated her path and trajectory from Ruby's, in my opinion. But I think that it's also what contributed to her sticking it out for so long, this hope and idea that maybe she could at least influence or change the trajectory of the teachings through their plan for expansion of the business and like the growth of the business. You know, you're flushing Jody towards the back a little bit. You've got strong bonds and relationships with all these other coaches. You see their inherent good, and separate from Jody's influence, there was, it sounds to me like, potential within these other people to adopt and understand the interpretation of the teachings through, again, the lens of love. So I think maybe she held on to it a little bit longer than she should have, just in that hope that the foundations were there and that could grow. That's just what I see. And for me personally, I just I see Paige as a very genuine, kind, loving person at the core. And I think that Ruby was lacking some of that. And I don't know why, a personality aspect of things maybe, but I think that's where it set Ruby up to be a primary target, and an easy target in a way, for this type of manipulation and going full bore. I think there was some of that power struggle as far as Ruby wanting to be seen as kind of in the same light that Paige was seen for the longest time with Jody, and being that number one go-to person. And then she feels like maybe she was a part of something really great and big. And, you know, I'm not excusing Ruby. I just feel like her personality is a little bit more callous, is a little bit more wrong versus right, and she bought into the wrong ideas. Anyways, I'm gonna play a couple more clips just to kind of touch on a really big important thing in my opinion that I've been kind of harping about from the very beginning, and it's just where I kind of feel like I want to round things off.
Ruby and I had been talking about a woman that she'd been working with. She was sponsoring her through the 12-step program, I believe. That was something that was very common in connections. Even if you weren't addicted to a substance, you know, you could be addicted to denial, you could be addicted to living in victim or some other stupid term. And she'd been helping this woman. And I remember a conversation where she said that she was going to drop sponsoring this woman, because she had the goal to do her dishes before she went to bed every night, and she just wasn't doing the dishes. And so she's not coming through, so she's living a dishonest life. And Ruby had said all these things. And I said, how do you know that woman wasn't abused in front of the kitchen sink every single day as a child? How do you know that being in front of the kitchen sink is the most traumatic place in the entire house to be? And that's why she won't do them. And she's not going to heal until she figures that out. And Ruby just looked at me, like down her nose, and said, I've never heard Jody explain it that way. And I was shocked. Because in my mind, I was thinking, isn't it a given? Like, you think you can just like talk to this woman over and over and then she'll start doing her dishes? Like, isn't it a given that there is something bigger and deeper going on that you can't help?
Okay, so first and foremost, I have to say, how the fuck is it that Paige is not a licensed therapist? She is not technically a certified coach or life coach of any sort. She even says it herself that when the whole mental fitness training and coaching thing came about, she's like, well, sure. Yeah, I know these things really well. I've seen their success and implementation in my own life. I sure, why not? And she's also, from the very beginning, she states that she was really on the board for the business. Her task and main participation in Connections was to help grow it. And like I said earlier, I think she stayed around and tried to fight that as long as she could, because she felt like she was hoping to be able to make the influence of good in an otherwise very toxic and unhealthy situation. But how is it that then Paige is the one sitting here having this discussion with Ruby about this lady who is going through a 12-step program for God only knows what kind of addiction, because we know that the umbrella of addiction for Jody was anything and everything could be an addiction, which is just... Anyway, I have my own feelings about all that, but in this conversation with Ruby, there's this very short-sightedness to what deeper things might be going on. And how is it that, again, Paige, somebody not certified, not licensed, not the therapist at all, can sit there and see what the therapist should be seeing? That's Jody. But yet at the same time, Jody is the one, puppeteering this whole thing. She's the mastermind of it all. She's the one controlling everything. And this woman is in a 12-step program through Jody's services. That's an assumption, I guess, but it obviously, with the way it's described, that's what was going on. Now you've got everything's in-house, so we still have the full control as well, full oversight of everything, right? But then you have Ruby playing multiple roles. She's a sponsor, but she's also acting as almost like a life coach, in the sense that she's setting these goals with this person for them to overcome what potentially could be traumatic things, which then encroaches upon therapy and a therapist role. And she's trying to hold this person to these goals, but there's this lack entirely of compassion. And now if you're talking about a person who, if they are in fact dealing with what I would envision as addiction, which is most commonly alcohol or substance abuse, but we all know that, again, the umbrella was much larger. Either way, when you're dealing with addicts, it is a level of compassion that is needed. There is some tough love in the sense that they have to choose these things for themselves, and at a certain point you cannot enable them. On top of that, you then have, like I said, Ruby kind of encroaching into this therapist side, and not necessarily that she's providing therapy, but that she's being instructed by a therapist to literally provide the exact opposite of that. And when she's confronted with something that should be in alignment with actual therapy and provided from a therapist, she scoffs at it and literally says, well, that's not how Jody explains it. In one of my first videos, when I first started covering this, I really harped on the fact that this was not life coaching, that this was, in my opinion, kind of a ploy or a front for Jody to avoid getting any more bad marks on her therapy side, because she's already at this point gone through all the bullshit with Adam and Adam Steed and Jesse Hildebrandt and their experiences with Jody between 2008 and 2012. And so I have to touch on this again because I just feel like it's proof right here that there was so much blending, not only just of Jody's services, but the people that were then being involved in her services, and the amount of breaching of code of ethics, and then, you know, confusing coaching and what life coaching's intentions are. It's just, it's absolutely disgusting to me that this was able to go on for as long as it did, to be honest, and that like nobody did anything, no matter how many times. I mean, back when Adam came forward, that should have been it. That man lost his wife, he lost his kids. I mean, he had already gone through the hell of the Boy Scout shit. Like, this lady, and it ties into why I feel like Jody is probably one of the most dangerous, like, cult leaders, in my opinion, that I've researched so far. And it's because she had this therapist aspect. It put her into a position of power without even really having to work for it. And it also allowed her the perfect, like, hunting grounds for people, and to take advantage of people and to use people. So anyways, I am looking forward to the third video. I will probably cover it in its own video like I've been doing, but it's going to tie right into the video I've been kind of holding off on and delayed on and waiting for this, in regards to Jody and kind of just her history and her past and some of the things that happened prior to everything that we're dealing with right now that I feel like should have stopped this crazy woman. So anyways, gonna end this one here. I definitely look forward to anybody's opinions and engagement, and please don't forget to like or subscribe if you like what you saw here. And until next time, please stay safe, be kind, and yeah.